Hello from my fancy chair. It's not actually my chair, but it's pretty fancy. See, check out this chair. Quite fancy. I can also make myself look like a ghost if I open and close this. See? Ghost, not ghost. Ghost, not ghost. Today we're going to be talking about the first food producers and the advent of agriculture. But to review from last time, we learned that zooarchaeological data can inform subsistence strategies, environmental reconstruction, seasonality of occupation, and economic organization. The objectives for today are to know that the agricultural revolution had social outcomes. You should also understand how behavioral changes and technological adaptations led to the evolutionary changes in plant biology. And finally, know that villages were developed to help support agriculture. So, who invented agriculture? Was it some guy who just was walking around in a field and then dropped something and then a few days later came back and was like, oh, look, tomatoes are growing? No. No one person invented agriculture. And no one society invented agriculture either. Agriculture developed in the Middle East and Mesoamerica at approximately the same time. And just so we're clear, Mesoamerica is Middle America. So there's evidence that the Euphrates and Jordan River valleys cultivated wheat and barley, and the Central Americas were cultivating squash, both around 9000 BC. And the Chinese began harvesting rice by about 6000 BC. Here's the Euphrates River right there. So why did domestication appear in several places? Well, it began in the Holocene, and then each center of domestication appeared to follow a unique path. And it appears that it started in several places on its own because it has a demographic advantage. First, it feeds more people in marginal environments. And second, agriculture allows you to wean children sooner, which allows for shorter birth intervals. Agriculture allows children to start eating weaning foods, or softer, sort of harder to choke on foods at younger ages, which therefore allows them to be weaned off of breast milk. And as you know, humans have an anovular lactation, so we do not ovulate as we're breastfeeding, as long as it's done consistently. And so if you are breastfeeding a child consistently, there's a high chance that you're not going to become pregnant. But the sooner that you're able to wean that child, the sooner you're able to become pregnant again. And when a whole population does that, the birth rate of that population goes up. And therefore, there's a demographic advantage of agriculture. So farming spreads, and it was either adapted by hunter-gatherers or these hunter-gatherers were displaced. There are two processes involved in agriculture. First, there's domestication, which are the biological processes that involves changes to the genotype and the physical characteristics of plants and animals which depend on humans for reproductive success. There's also cultivation, which is the intentional preparation of fields, sowing, harvesting, and storing of seeds. The first domesticate was, of course, the dog, and these are my dogs. They're beautiful. They're Brinkley and Bailey. They are Corgi lab mixes, so they kind of look like land manatees. It was domesticated about 14,000 to 10,000 years ago in Southwest Asia, East Asia, and Europe. They were used primarily for hunting and defense, and they could run down prey and defend hunter-gatherers from other predators by barking. The process of domestication follows a pretty simple pattern. First, you remove that animal from the wild population, and then you can perform artificial selection for the desired traits. You protect that animal from predators and habituate it to humans. This is easiest with juveniles and with herding animals like sheep. To identify a domestic animal, there's generally a reduction in size. They're usually more docile. There's more of an emphasis on things like meat, milk, or wool, or things that are beneficial to humans. And there are new colors that don't normally occur in nature. Identifying a domesticated plant is a little bit different because plants don't really have personalities and they can't become more docile. So the seeds are larger. The seeds will generally stay attached to the head of the plant longer. There's a loss of self-dispersal and a loss of natural defenses, such as a reduction in the husk and the spines. This is corn. This is undomesticated corn, and this is domestic corn, just to show you that there is a transition from smaller seeds to larger seeds. So, did people domesticate plants, or did plants domesticate people? Who domesticated whom? People select plants to make food for themselves, and more people are supported by a large storable food source. But on the other hand, the plants are given a habitat to live in, and the plants are reproduced by people and the plants then have many descendants. So both enjoy mutual success in population growth, and this is called mutualism, or a process of coevolution. So the two are actually evolving together, the people and the plants. Here's just some examples of the earliest agricultural economies. Southwest Asia, they domesticated wheat and barley. East Asia, they domesticated millet, which is a small seeded grass like a cereal. This over here is millet. And rice. And then sub-Saharan Africa also domesticated millet. The New Guinea highlands, they domesticated yam and sago palm, which is like a little itty-bitty baby palm tree. Then the Andean South America, they domesticated potatoes, beans, and tomatoes. People think that potatoes came from Ireland, but they didn't. They came from the Andean South America. Then Central Mexico, they domesticated maize, beans, and squash, the Three Sisters. And Eastern North America domesticated squash and the sunflower. We can learn about these plants in archaeology by using the preservation of archaeological plant remains. Charred seeds are the most important, and I was lucky enough this summer to find some charred plant remains in a fire pit. That was pretty cool. But there are other plant proxies too. You can look at phytoliths, which are the microscopic silica structures found in some plant tissues, which survive after the plant decays. But you can also look at impressions and pollen. I think it was pollen that they looked at in Broken Cay, Pueblo. There are two different ways to sample for plant remains at an archaeological site. You can do bucket flotation and machine flotation. I personally have never done machine flotation. I've only done bucket flotation, which is, you can see being done in this picture here. She's pouring a bucket of soil that's had water added to it into a sieve, and you can see the beans and barley and lentils and things coming out into the sieve there. So once that's dry, you look for identifiable seeds, fruit, shells, wood, tough stems, etc. And then you identify them. Identification is based on the principle of uniformitarianism, which says that plants growing in the past resemble those growing today. Identification also depends on morphology, so you're looking at the shape of the plant, or the seeds. There were two phases of the Neolithic in the Levant. There was the pre-pottery Neolithic A and the pre-pottery Neolithic B. Over the span of these two periods, there was a population increase, likely due to the rise of agriculture that occurred. Pre-pottery Neolithic A occurred 11,500 to 10,500 years ago and was characterized by an experimentation with cereals and grinding corn, but not quite domestication. Just kind of like testing it out a little bit. They also exhibited communal living, and there is evidence for conflict, such as the Tower of Jericho. There were figurines and paintings, new social organization, and they had domesticated the dog. And like I said, one example of a pre-pottery Neolithic A site is Jericho. Jericho is located north of the Dead Sea on the West Bank in modern Palestine. So right there-ish. There are a series of houses that are pit houses, and the stone foundations of the pit houses are made with unbaked mud bricks. And they also found a number of hearths and silos where they would have stored their cereals. There's a wall in a tower, which begs the question, how much conflict were these people experiencing? Was the wall used for defense, or was it more of a ritualistic thing? Was it also a display of power, or could it have been a symbol of group membership? These are all unanswered questions. Then there's the pre-pottery Neolithic B. The pre-pottery Neolithic B lasted from 7,220 to 5,850 BC, and during this period, farming developed. People in the Middle East were growing things like cereals, pulses, and legumes, and domesticating sheep and goats. There was an increase in communal living. There were more community centers, and the houses were no longer pits. They were more rectangular. And then during this period, people started plastering houses and skulls. This is an example of a plastered skull from the Middle East. One example of this is Tel Ramad. Tel Ramad is located approximately 12 miles south of Damascus in Syria. A tel is just Arabic for mound. It was settled in 8000 BC. It's an agricultural site where they domesticated wheat, barley, and flax. And there's also been finds including sickles and arrowheads and bones from sheep and goats. So it's clearly an agricultural PPNB site, pre-pottery Neolithic B. Then there's Çatalhöyük, which was from 9,000 years ago. It's located in modern Turkey. It's agricultural, it's an apartment dwelling, and it held a large population of over 3,000 people. The people at Çatalhöyük used agriculture supplemented with hunting and gathering. They consumed a lot of wheat, barley, and peas, and there's evidence that they had domesticated goats. There were also small volumes of trade in luxury goods. So just to review the timing of plant domestication, in the pre-pottery and Neolithic A, there was cultivation and gathering of wild plants. And during the pre-pottery Neolithic B, there was cultivation of domestic plants. So there's a difference between the PPNA and the PPNB. There was wild plants and domestic plants. And this correlates with a period of environmental change where it was a bit cooler in the pre-pottery Neolithic A and became warmer in the pre-pottery Neolithic B, which could have facilitated the growing of domestic plants. So to conclude, villages were developed to help support agriculture. Living close together and the shortening of the birth interval led to higher birth rates, and ultimately the population grew. Increasingly dense populations and the formation of villages led to the development of new social rules, and the agricultural revolution was more social than economic in nature.